very stimulating and inspiring afternoon. I think that you will experience here with the fabulous panel we have. Before we launch into our panel presentation, we are going to give the Linda Amos Award, and to bestow that award on this year's winner is Linda Amos, who is an Associate Vice President for the Health Sciences. Linda, would you come up?
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to have an opportunity to give the award that was first given in my name, and this is the third year of the award, and it's a real pleasure for me to introduce the recipient of that award this year. This award came about not because I created it, but because the President's Commission on the Status of Women, along with the Women's Week Committee, put together this award to recognize women who are providing service to women in the university community and on a broader basis as well. So today, we're very pleased to have Victoria Judd. Would you come up, please, be the recipient? She is this year's awardee. She is a pediatric cardiologist in the School of Medicine. She holds the position of clinical professor of pediatrics, and she's assumed the position recently of associate dean for admissions, diversity, community outreach, and graduate medical education in the School of Medicine. In all of this, she works with students, is what she really does, and with faculty. And I have to say that Vicki is really the driving force for a lot of the changes that have occurred in the School of Medicine in helping to recruit, retain, and advance women and people of color into the profession of medicine. Vicki has a reputation of being a very warm, giving, and caring individual. And it's through her energy and her serving as a role model to not only students, but faculty and staff that she has made a significant contribution to the world of women in our community. So it's been a pleasure for me over the last 2 or 3 years when I moved into the Health Sciences Center to start working closer with Vicki, and she extols a wonderful set of values and is true to those values in all her work with students and faculty. Vicki, it's just a real pleasure to present you with this award. Congratulations to you.
Thank you, Dr. Amos. I must say that Dr. Amos has been an excellent example to follow for her commitment, her scholarship, her leadership, her advocacy, her teaching, her dedication, and the many other talents that she has. She's an excellent example, and hopefully someday I'll be able to attain some of the things that she has attained. She's an excellent role model and exemplifies many of the goals that I would like to achieve. I would like to also acknowledge Coach Gardner, who received the award last year, who has made significant changes and influenced the lives of many. These are two individuals who have given much, and I'm very honored to be named for this award in Dr. Amos's name, but to be with this very exemplary group of individuals. I'm not alone in this. I didn't accomplish the goals that we've accomplished alone, and I need to acknowledge many individuals, but two in particular. And if they would stand, Kathy Doulis, Director of Admissions, and Christy Rujan, Director of Diversity and Community Outreach. It's easy to come up with an idea, but the implementation and the force behind it does not come from me. It comes from these individuals and their offices, so I need to acknowledge their input. I also need to acknowledge a couple of other things that I've learned from my parents. The first is that which is worthwhile is not easy, and you will meet opposition in all stages. The second is the greatest use of a life is to spend it on something that will outlast it. And my parents have taught me that diversity is very important. Diversity means acceptance, understanding, inclusion for all of us, not just women, but people of color, and all of us, because we're all unique. And we all have a place, and we all have a voice, and we all should be listened to, accepted for who we are, and not assimilated into one universal culture. We have made some strides. We have much more to make in promoting diversity on this campus, and I appreciate this honor in recognition of a number of people's efforts in achieving diversity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're very honored to have you here today, Vicki, and of course, Linda. It's wonderful to have you here too. The theme of our week's activities is Breaking Boundaries, Reconstructing Activism. And if by any chance you're able to follow each of the events in the week, this is the third thing I think that we have had on this week, you will see that there's a building block of ideas that are coming along. Tish Hinojosa on Monday night unfolded for us in her music a vision of woman as helper, a sort of idea of activism, even with just reaching out a hand to another person, to an impoverished person, to anyone. You are being an activist in a certain way, and it's marvelous how her music conveys that. Yesterday evening, the wonderful Wilma Mankiller was here, and we could see her style of activism unfolding in a very conversational speech that she gave. She told me this morning that she abandoned all of her notes as she stepped to the podium and discovered that the audience ranged from young teens all the way through very, very senior citizens. And the diversity of the audience was deeply pleasing to her. So she adopted a conversational tone, and we could see again, like in Tish's music, an unfolding of her values and her spirit to serve. And she said, it's such a big mistake to live a life in moderation, and the most important thing you need to do is love and not in moderation. And love is at the heart of the activism that we're trying to celebrate this week. So another great honor for me as director of the Marriott Library is to introduce our panel moderator for today, Activism in Utah, Continuity and Change, Irene Fisher, who is herself a very honored and beloved member of our community, director of the Benyon Center, the Lowell Benyon Center for Community Service. Irene, over to you.
Thank you. And I am thrilled to be here. This is the first test of our mics. Are you hearing me? Doesn't sound like the mic's on. Is it? Yeah. Okay. I'm thrilled to be here surrounded by this group of women. Some of them I've known a long time, others I'm just getting to know, and so I want to say thank you to the Women's Week Committee for the privilege of being part of this, and to Meg Brady, who did the work specifically of bringing together this group of women. I want to make just a couple comments by way of introduction. One of them, I want to do just what Sarah did, tie this event to the event last night, only I have a much less profound way of tying it to last night. One of the things Wilma Mankiller said that I enjoyed a lot, and I enjoyed all of her comments, and the drumming ceremony of the Native American students who helped welcome her. Wilma said, never argue with a fool. Someone may walk by and overhear you. Switch. I thought that might be good advice for activism and a good beginning thought for this panel. The introduction is ask you, how many of the people in this room, by your definition of activism, consider yourself an activist? Okay, I'd say maybe that was half of us. We'll see. I think I'd like to try to remember, and maybe the other panelists will help me remember to ask that again after we talk a little bit about what we think activism is. We're going to try to run this panel differently than many panels run. We'll see how it works. I think often groups of people come together and are introduced as a panel, and then they each give separate speeches. We hope you won't hear 6 separate speeches today. We hope you'll hear a conversation between people who have been engaged in important work in this community, and that at some point we'll invite all of us into that conversation so we can all be participants, because we know there's huge amounts of activist experience in this room. I'm going to first of all introduce each of the panelists very briefly, not by titles, not by accomplishments, but I want to show you a page out of my personal, imaginary photo album. I want to just give you one photo snapshot of each of the panelists. Then I'm going to ask one question that I'm going to ask them each to respond to, just so you get to meet them each in their own words and get a further picture of them. And then we're going to have a conversation around some structured questions that we hope that we'll all enjoy. So let me start my photo album. The person sitting closest to me and the person I've met most recently, Rebecca Chavez Hauk, I picture in her cap and gown, much like the cap and gowns you've all seen at a University of Utah commencement. Rebecca graduated from the University of Utah in journalism and mass communication, and has a long activist and professional career of putting that degree to really good use for a lot of causes in the community. And at the bottom of my photo album, right under her name, it says, "And she's a wonderful woman, get to know her better." The next person I'd like to next snapshot I'd like to show you is Christine Durham. My picture of Christine Durham is of Judge Durham, not then Judge Durham, but then Christine Durham, attorney at law, standing on the floor of the Utah House of Representatives when there was they had convened to a committee of the whole prior to voting on the Equal Rights Amendment in the mid-70s. And Christine was giving them a very clear piece of a woman's mind about why they should vote for the Equal Rights Amendment. It was a very powerful and moving experience for me, so I get a lot of vibes when I look at that snapshot. The next snapshot I'd like to show you is Genevieve Atwood. Genevieve was at the Capitol in her picture, her snapshot as well. Only Genevieve was sitting at the table in the front of a committee hearing room when she was co-chair of the Human Service Appropriations Subcommittee for the legislature. And I get a little intimidated when I look at that snapshot because Genevieve had the power to grant or not grant many of the kinds of appropriations that I was there working for. And she was I also remember as part of that snapshot that she was a very clear-thinking and reasoned legislator who didn't always vote for what I hoped she would, but did a good deal of the time. The next snapshot is Deborah Daniels. And with Deborah, my picture is not Deborah personally. It's a snapshot that she made with her verbal description, makes me think of every time I hear about domestic violence. Deborah was making a presentation, and she described the feelings of a woman who had experienced a great deal of physical abuse. And she was describing that woman as she drove toward home, and her sweaty palms getting sweatier and sweatier as she neared home, and wondered what the temperament would be in her home when she got home. And I cannot hear anything about domestic violence without thinking of those sweaty palms and thinking of Deborah Daniels and her powerful ability to create pictures that were in themselves activist in nature. And then I'd like to introduce a snapshot of Norma Matheson. My picture of Norma Matheson is sitting around a board table when she and I were both board members of the League of Women Voters. And Norma announced that she was going to have to resign from the board of the League of Women Voters because her husband was going to run for governor. And I thought, oh, shit. Who ever heard of Scott Matheson? He's not going to win, and we're going to lose a great board member. So now you have a little picture, because of my snapshots, of how good I am and making predictions about the political future. So those are just brief brushstrokes, brief snapshots of these women. And I'm going to ask them to now introduce themselves to you a little bit more by answering this question. And I'm asking this question because I think we all need to share our stories. I think stories are so important. So I'm going to ask each one of them to tell us about one of their most satisfying activist experiences. And they've all had a little warning, so they've had a chance to think about it, except Christine, who had to come in a little late, so we'll start at the other end for this one and give her a little time to think. And this is the only one we're going to answer in a row. We're going to converse after this.
Well, I've been thinking a lot about this, and it's really, this was a tough question, because I think with all the years I've got behind me, there are a lot of things that have happened that I've really been able to see the results of over time even. So I'm looking way, way back. This is really almost when I was on the league board, and that's really ancient history. But we had a son come home from school one day talking about government and how it worked. And his dad started asking me some questions if he understood the process. And he was in junior high. And he didn't. And Scott kept telling him all these things. And Scott said, aren't they teaching you this in school? That we're a country ruled by law, and that you need to understand the process. And Jim, who is now the congressman, by the way, said no. I guess he listened to his father. But at any rate, at that particular time, the American Bar Association was involved in starting programs in schools called law-related education. And so Scott and I, along with now Judge Tom Green and his wife Kay, went to the school board and made a presentation about law-related education and said, we really feel that children need to have hands-on experience about how the system works, why people are elected, and what they're supposed to be doing once they are, and about what the three branches of government do. And Christine, I know, has set as a mock trial judge that is a result of this program, because this program that started at Clayton Junior High expanded from a pilot program there to school-wide, Salt Lake City district-wide program, and it's now a statewide program. And one of its probably most visible programs is the mock trial program that they have throughout the state, and the competitions that have grown from that are statewide with, and I can't even tell you how many schools participate in it now, but they go through a process of understanding how laws affect them and how the system, particularly the judicial system, is working. And so there's a program that I have seen grow over, 30 years, I guess, 30 years. And that gives me great joy every time I hear about the mock trials, and I'm invited to participate with them as a judge or as a mentor of some sort.
As I think about the different levels of activism and the different levels of trying to find the most satisfying, I get torn because of the different areas in which I work. But I do recall when I started working in the area of domestic violence, and I recall a time when we were so challenged by the lack of laws and the lack of clarity and the disparities between one jurisdiction and another around how things were handled. And I remember being asked to go and present to the legislature and talk with them about the issues of domestic violence, and to kind of bring to them an experience without having to expose or continue to violate anyone, what it might be like for a woman. And I remember that it quickly turned into a process of, and isn't it true, Ms. Daniels? And I was so taken back by that. And the kind of questions that were asked of me were, aren't most women who are beaten in their homes minorities, and aren't they poor, and all these demographics that was so uncharacteristic of what we were seeing. It was a part of it, but a small part of it. And at first, I remember feeling so overwhelmed and intimidated and threatened by this group of men who I just didn't quite know what to make of how things had turned so quickly when it had felt like a friendly invite, and all of a sudden I felt attacked and threatened. And all of a sudden I began to think about why I was there and what was happening for me, and why we were there, to what I was supposed to be doing, and I thought to myself, how did this turn around so quickly? And I remember beginning to talk more and say, well, let me just answer those questions, because they just kept coming. I said, let me just stop and answer those questions. And talking about what really was the complexion of domestic violence in our community, and being able to all of a sudden turn the tables again and then see the question shift and the tone shift and the attitude shift. And I remember when the time was up, they said, well, no, let's just take a little bit more time. And to be able to talk about that and to educate on such a level, and to be a part of what turned into what was a 3-year process in changing some of the laws and getting some things put in place, to be a part of when all of that was done, to see some of the changes that were made, to remember what it was like that day, to feel so threatened and intimidated, but so driven by what I knew and what I saw every day. And I was able to address in that arena issues of gender, issues of class, issues of race, issues of poverty, issues of homelessness. And that is probably the most powerful for me, because I was able to take that conversation and transcend all the different areas that I feel so passionate about and speak to them and see a change that continued to make a difference, and to see those laws put into place and to see the difference that it made once that happened. So that's been, I think, my most, one of my most powerful experiences in activism, and satisfying.
Well, and you comment that it's one of the most. I think one of the things about activism is it is so satisfying. Probably one of the most for me would be the 100 Years, 100 Women efforts of 1996. It was dreamed up by Karen Shepard and me as we were just fantasizing about ways to celebrate Utah's 100th year of statehood. And I think what made it so satisfying was that it was a celebration. We decided that we would recruit 100 women to run for the legislature. And then we were told that was just too threatening. And that was fun, okay? The idea that it was threatening to the legislature to have 100 women of all parties running, so we backed off. And we backed off, and it was 100, trying to recruit 100 women to run for political office. I think one of the exciting things was to see that change is often made one by one, and recruiting was one by one. And we had probably 800 people who touched that particular program. Some of them were recruiters, some of them were coachers. I think almost, I mean, I just look around here and see the number of people. And then I hope I don't get teary now. For me, what was incredible was how it clicked. It seemed there were 8 of us who were rabble-rousers. And then I got breast cancer. And out of the clear blue sky, 2 interns showed up from the Benyon Center saying, oh, we can do some of that. I would take the cards we sent out to every person who was running. Just every week they got a letter that would coach them on, you might be thinking about doing this. I'd take those up to the hospital, and as I was waiting for my radiation therapy, I'd start labeling these things. The next thing I'd know, there were other people there, sometimes doctors helped me do this. And it was very satisfying. It turned out there were lots more than 100 women who actually ran that year. Some of them still celebrate it. And it was satisfying to celebrate some of the things where we've made advances. Because sometimes when you don't make advances, you say to yourself, boy, I sure feel clobbered some of the time. And it was very satisfying to be part of it. And I want to thank everybody here who was part of it for helping. It was great. And one of the things about activism is sometimes, I think everybody makes a difference. But sometimes you get more credit than others. And I get a lot more credit for the 100 Years, 100 Women effort. It was really a collaborative effort. It was wonderful.
I'm going to give myself a chance to answer this too, real briefly. One very satisfying activist moment that I experienced was this year going up to the Utah State Capitol during the legislative session and seeing a seated legislator who had been a VISTA volunteer in a program coming through the state. He wasn't really at the University of Utah, but coming through a VISTA program that we ran on all the campuses across the state, sitting there, elected, and then another person who did come through the Benyon Center, who was there as one of the key low-income advocates in the state, and that was very satisfying to me to see those people.
I kind of cheated with my answer. Instead of just one personally satisfying activist moment, mine is kind of an ongoing moment. And I'm not saying this just because you're here, Donna, but Donna Maldonado with KRCO Radio. When I graduated from university, I graduated with a degree in broadcast journalism. And so when I volunteered at KRCO, it was kind of to get that angst out of wanting to be a broadcast journalist and not really actualizing that. My career took a different direction, one that I find very satisfying. But I originally volunteered at KRCL because I wanted to kind of take what I had learned at the university and have an opportunity to use that on the radio to hone my skills in developing programming. And what I have found is I've been a volunteer at the station for more than 10 years now, and it's hard for me to believe. Every year that goes by, I can't believe it's been more than a decade that I've been at the station as a volunteer, doing a radio program that I share with Dr. Teresa Martinez, who also teaches up here at the university. And we do a weekly Hispanic public affairs program called La Voz de la Gente, which is the voice of the people. And what I have found is I never really looked at it as an opportunity to practice activism or to become an activist, but it has actually become that for me. And I do it by letting other people tell their stories or talk about their issues or clarify points of view or uncover things that we as a general public may not see on a day-to-day basis. And so it's almost like I actualize my activism through other people by having them come and explore those issues on my radio program. And it's something that I'm continuously doing. So it's not a one-time thing, but it's something that I don't think I could ever give up because I get something out of it. I think the listeners get something out of it, and I hope that the people for whom my guests may be advocating also obtain some level of achievement with. So that's my thing.
Thank you. I likewise have been unable to identify especially a successful activist experience. It's not that I haven't had successes, I have, but in thinking about my personal satisfaction, sometimes, and particularly in the long run, that has emerged in efforts which would otherwise be designated unsuccessful. I think about the lobbying effort for ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. I gave about 4 years of my life to that, first in North Carolina and then here in Utah when I moved, and it was doomed. And we lost, but I made friends and encountered not just kindred souls, but some extremely great souls, whom I count among my friends, acquaintances, role models, mentors, and cherished peers in this community that could only have emerged from an effort like the one we undertook. And then for me, it was extended, as for many of us, into the experience of the International Women's Year Conference in Salt Lake City in 1977, which again, in terms of political successes, was a total and utter disaster and an extremely painful experience, but which created a network of women committed to activism for the future and to change in this community that I think could never have emerged in a more encouraging atmosphere. So I have to say that in many respects, some of my deepest satisfactions have come from what you might term unsuccessful activist efforts.
One of the interesting things, as we were talking just before the panel started, I had originally worded the question, what is your most satisfying activist experience? And a number of the panelists said, well, I can't figure out which one is the most satisfying. And that was really nice to hear, because often we think about the losses, the things that don't happen as a result of our work, and it's really nice to know that those satisfactions are there out of successful or unsuccessful events, and that there's more than one for many of us who could also count how many unsatisfying or unsuccessful efforts there were. The word in the title of this panel focuses around activism, continuity and change. It seems to me that maybe the next thing we're going to want to talk about a little bit, and we've started to define it through stories, is what do we mean by activism? What is it? What is this thing called activism? Some of you raised your hands when I asked if you considered yourself activists. Some didn't. So you must have some definition in your head. I'm curious what we here think activism is. We're going to try to do a definition or a description. And this, now, we're not doing this.
Okay.
So
I've
just-
got one, because I was thinking about this. Actually, I was thinking about all of your questions. They were very good. I really liked the anger one. I hope we get to that one. But I think that activism is seeing something that needs doing and then going out and trying to do it. I was going to say and then doing it, but I think sometimes you can only try to do it. That sounds simplistic, but in order to do the seeing, you have to have some vision of what could be instead of what is, and you have, and then in order for the seeing to translate into doing, you have to care enough about it. So there's vision, there's passion, and then you've got to have some talent. And it may only be the talent to identify people who are organized enough to get done what you're not organized enough to get done. But that's my thumbnail sketch. Seeing, being able to see what needs doing, whether it's, well, it's usually changing something, let's face it. Whether it's stopping something that should not be going on or creating an environment in which something that should be going on can happen. And then trying to do it.
Interesting. I spoke at the Women's Resource Center, Brown Bag, about a month or so ago, and that was almost exactly the same definition that I suggested that I held about activism. Anybody else have any variation on that?
Piggyback on that. One of my first memories of what I would term activism I saw exhibited by my own mother. And she was bilingual, and there were some migrant farm workers that worked in our community. And I remember being, a very, very young child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and going with my mother as she took women that worked in the fields that were expecting to doctors to get prenatal care. Now, she may not have known the women personally. It wasn't a personal issue of her own. I mean, it wasn't just the fact that she felt that injustice was being done towards her. She saw someone else that had a need. She knew that she could help them access that need, and she just did something about it. And what that kind of stirs in me is the concept of thinking outside self and doing activism not just because something is happening to you or to your family or something on a personal level. And what I would do is just kind of make a comparison between what I see as advocacy and activism. To me, and again, this is a very personal definition, advocacy is seeing something that might be an inherent injustice on your part. I advocate for my child if something happens to her at school and I need to help her rectify a problem. Activism to me seems more global. It's bigger. You're looking at the big picture. What can I do to make systemic changes to make things better for somebody else? It may not be something that I'm suffering as an injustice personally, but in the big picture concept of things, I'm seeing an injustice that I don't think is fair, and I want to do something about it, and then I move forward, and like you said, I may not be able to get everything done that I want done, but it's again taking the bricks off the wall one brick at a time and tackling it at that end.
I think I want to add one more piece to that, because I agree with everything that's been said, and I also think for myself that one of the things that I look at so much is the issues of disparity in our society, and that part of what activism is for me is the piece that I've become more and more comfortable with, and that is ally work. And I think that sometimes with activism, we forget that we have privilege at times in our life, and we don't use that privilege. But I think activism is taking the privilege that we do have in different ways and become a voice for someone whose voice is not clearly heard because of the position that they may be in, or it might be utilizing a resource that I have that someone else may not have, or and helping someone else access something to bring justice or to reduce oppression or to eliminate their inability to be viewed with a certain level of dignity. And I think through that kind of activism, it also is, I like because it's broad, because when one person steps up and becomes an ally in that role of activism, through everyone that they have contact with, they teach them about how they can use their privilege, their opportunities to help benefit others. So I like everything that's been said, and I add that piece to it as well.
Yeah, I think that one thing you're pointing out too is that there are various levels of activism, and some demand a lot of leadership, and some demand a lot of followers who are willing to be in that category. And so even though you're just making a couple of phone calls, to me that's being an activist.
I'd like to add, not only are there levels, but I think there are kinds of activism. And the second part of this question that you haven't seen is how have our attitudes and feelings about activism changed over time? And mine have. I think they involve the desire and the ability to bring about change, but I think they also have to do with power. And I think there's a range of activism, and at the risk of being minorly controversial, I think there's an element of feel-good activism that I get more and more annoyed with. The idea that I think activism has something to do with bringing about a change, and failing is okay. But even then, there's the bonding by adversity that is so important to the coalescing of teams. But I think there's a depth, there's a shallow activism and there's deep activism. And I just toss that out, is that I think it's more subtle than that all activism is successful and good and positive. I think there's some that just is very superficial.
Would you be willing to illustrate? Even more controversial?
I know, thank you.
Oh, I happen to be very involved in environmental kinds of things, and I think the idea of thinking globally and acting locally, the idea that people can point fingers so easily at others and perhaps not shape up their own act, is just cool these days, particularly, it seems to me, at university level, to think environmentalism is in, but not ride the bus. I mean, it's that kind of thing of
As long as I don't have to make any sacrifices.
yeah.
So how about that second part of the question? Have your ideas about activism changed? I think one of the things that's changed for me is more and more understanding that the way I live my life is a part of the activism that adds the integrity that's needed to make activism real. And I don't ride the bus enough.
It's okay. I walk here.
I think there's risk-taking when I think of that, because I think, in order for me at times to be an activist, I may find myself in a position where I am then more targeted for greater oppression, greater misunderstanding. I take some risks, and I find myself today, and how it's changed me is I'm not as afraid of those risks as I were at one time. I'm not afraid to say the things that may be unpopular, but I am always aware of the safety that I lose sometimes in taking those risks. But I think the risk-taking element is one part of that. And thinking about what you were saying, Genevieve, in terms of that shallow or that safe activism, I think whenever you're an activist and you really want to be in that trenches activism, you have to be willing to be aware that you then become a greater target for others to single you out. And I think if you're afraid of that, then you have to find a way to do that is powerful, impactful, and allows yourself to get involved and to do some things on a deeper level. But I think that risk-taking is so much a part of activism.
There's something significant in the way I think now about activism in the abstract. I think my standards for myself are similar and maybe even higher. I share the phenomenon you describe of not being as concerned about approval and being more willing to take risks. Now, some of that's a function of getting older and more powerful and less vulnerable. But the thing that that has changed are the standards that I apply to other people. And unlike Genevieve, maybe unlike Genevieve, I think I'm a lot more tolerant in my 50s than I was in my 30s of people who are unwilling to take the risks with me, or the risks that I think need to be taken. I was much more intolerant in my youth of people who, for whatever reason, and sometimes it's very personal, sometimes it's a level of vulnerability that you can't even understand, not knowing someone's personal circumstances. So I think I cut people a little more slack, although I'm still heard to mutter on occasion, you know, you could be doing more, she could be doing more, I wish he would do more. But I'm much less judgmental than I was when I was young. And I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it does take one thing off of my list of things to be anxious about.
Thinking about continuity and change in activism, we've kind of talked a little bit about changes in our own thinking. I'm wondering if anybody has any comments about just the change in kind of visible activism from, say, the early 70s, which is, or the 70s, which is as far back as I can go,
I
to
can
now.
go back farther.
Okay. Well, we could go back. I can remember Esther Landa saying, talking about how hard she worked to get Head Start programs in Utah, and I kind of thought, oh my gosh, Head Start was controversial. So, you know, I know it goes back farther, but I'm just wondering about those changes.
I'm just thinking, of course, from a political perspective a little bit. And I think of the issues that were red flag issues during certain campaigns, and way back, well, of course this was the 70s, I guess but I remember during the first campaign that I was ever involved in my life with Scott, the big red flag was child care, daycare, of all things. And I mean, nobody even...
Isn't it still on the agenda?
Well, it is, but not as, oh, well, if you support it, you're a bad person kind of thing, as much as, within certain circles, I'll admit, but I'm saying even on a national level, it was a red flag. It isn't a red flag nationally. It might still have some resistance here, there is no question, but it isn't a campaign issue. You haven't heard that brought up in campaigns as much as right then that was the thing, and it evolves over the years what the red flags are. It's not that they go away, but they may be diminished in importance. Let me put it that way. So I don't know what the point is, except that I do think that if activism evolves over the years and finds certain focuses that we have to address as they pop up.
I see an ever-increasing level of sophistication. I mean, my experience, I mean, just thinking about the child care issue, I think in our state that is still, it's true, it doesn't surface in campaigns, but that I think is because a lot of people buried it, knowing that it is controversial and high risk. And now, if you want to be an activist, say for something like government-supported child care, or even at least government-facilitated child care, you really have to be very sophisticated in the ways in which you collect your data, the ways in which you analyze it. I guess the whole business of politics maybe has also gotten increasingly sophisticated. But working on gender issues inside the courts, for example, I mean, I consistently encounter the attitude, oh, we've been there, we've done that, don't bother me with that stuff anymore. And yet what I see are phenomena that are going on, sometimes sub rosa, much less blatant than anything we had to deal with in the 70s, but which are just as damaging and demeaning and harder to identify and harder to advocate for. The backlash that so many issues I have cared about have been experiencing in the last decade, I think has made the work of activists harder.
I think one thing that's really changed activism is just how capable we are technology-wise. You know, you can make your voice known by the click of a mouse and send an email to your congressman. And I think it has some good points and it has some bad points, because some of the hand-to-hand involvement, getting your hands dirty in activism, it's a little bit easier not to get involved in that. But on the other hand, I think it also makes it very easy for people who are extremely busy to make their voices heard via that type of a technological advance. It's just amazing, where you would have to sit down and write a letter, get it to the mailbox, that whole type of thing, and now it's just, you know, after hours you can send a message and feel that your voice is heard. But again, I don't know where that's going to send us. It's just something that I've observed as a change.
I came into contact with a concept related to continuity and change in activism while I was working on issues of free public education. And there was a point, probably 10 years ago now, where Utah Legal Services won a case that really required that school districts waive school fees for kids. School fees like locker fees, book fees, costs associated with shop, all kinds of things that were keeping low-income kids from participating as full citizens in the educational system. And so we celebrated that victory, and we've been working on various issues related to free public education for about 10 years that I was aware of. But at our celebration, one of the participants from Utah Issues brought a cake to help us symbolize the activism related to free public education. It was a really ugly cake, but it extended, he had taken a chocolate cake and he cut it into strips about this wide and then put them end to end. So it went from one corner to the diagonal corner of my dining room table, and then he frosted it with white frosting, but the chocolate still showed through. And it was a bar graph. And he put red frosting points all along it, and it started with the Utah Constitution and the phrase, "The common school shall be free." Well, somebody was an activist and got that language into the Utah Constitution. And then there were things that the state superintendent of public instruction had done, and the things that a small group of single parents had done, and things that had been done all through the years to bring us up into the 90s. And it really made me think how any activist act is part of a long continuum, and like the child care, it's changed in its tone, it's changed in the way things happen, but it's still there.
Yeah, it doesn't go away, but what is the topic of the day often is what attracts the activists, and I think it's the activists who are constant. I guess that's the point I was trying to make, is the people who truly care don't abandon the cause, again, because it's the thing to be on the bus path. And politically, it's been interesting to see over the years what is the red flag word.
And it means all sorts of people can then become activists. So I think people come into being more activist at different times of their lives. And frankly, I think everybody makes a difference. People who go to the legislature think, will I make a difference? And when I coach them, I say, you will either do good or you will do harm, but you cannot not make a difference in the legislature. And I fully believe that each of us as individuals are like that wherever we are. I think we're constantly making the world just a little bit better or a little bit worse, and we have the power to do that. And I think it's very exciting, and I think as activism by topic changes, you get different sets of people involved. And I just think about how many women are involved. I'm thinking again about the 100 Years, 100 Women. How many women in Utah were involved in the suffragette movement? It was exciting.
And Genevieve saying a little bit better or a little bit worse, and then the whole issue of by whose definition comes in. So there may be activists working on a variety of perspectives on any given issue.
Yeah, on that theme of continuity too, I loved that Norma talked about the days when law-related education was invented in the state of Utah. There are some people, Norma, and you know them all, who are currently working to take that to the next level. We have a group of us who are interested, have a commitment from the Utah State School Board to allow us a slot on the advisory committee that's doing the revisions in the curriculum. And they seem to have bought off on the notion that we ought to be incorporating education about dispute resolution, problem solving, communication skills, the rule of law, and our government into public ed K through 12, not just, you know, every junior high. Of course, that's the mock trial program.
Sure.
But with any luck, the mock trial program will one day be in every junior high school in the state, as will appropriate age level education. And it's all building on that work that you all started decades ago.
So earlier in this panel, I asked you how many of you thought of yourselves as activists. We talked a little bit, everything from Sarah saying, describing Tish House's definition of activism is just reaching out to a person, having an idea and trying to act on it, thinking of the other. Think about those expressions of activism. How many of you now would consider yourself an activist? Okay. Well, we're going to have to keep saying things till y'all get it. Before, I want to move on to Christine's question pretty soon that she mentioned about anger, but just before we do that, let me invite anybody in here before we quit talking about a definition of activism. What have we forgotten about? Or what other perspectives on activism do any of you want to offer?
You seem to think maybe we're assuming that activism is positive. Can you maybe comment that sometimes activism has negative consequences or negative intent?
Negative intent as well as consequence? Okay.
Well, there are activists in all kinds of bad causes. And I don't know if that's what you're...
I disagree with her, and she's an activist. So, you had a question or a comment?
I wanted to say sometimes I feel activists want to feel very important. They like the leadership role. They like to feel other people should look up to them. And sometimes I think that could be negative.
Any response?
I think what's key to that is if you realize why you became an activist, which is to think of others and to go think beyond yourself. If you keep that at the core of yourself, that it makes it easier not to fall into that trap. And I know some people have, but I think that when I look at these women, I look out in the audience to people that I know are very active. One thing that I see with successful activists is an element of humility. And I think that I always try to keep that core there, that I'm not doing it for myself, and that there is a level of humility that one has to incorporate in your activism.
I think one thing I want to say to that too is, as an activist, if you're going out as an activist saying that you have all the answers and you know everything, you know, and that you're there because you're going to take everyone along, or as if you go into it and you realize that every person that you come in contact with, and on every level, teaches you something and gives you the information you need to, you know, move a cause along or be involved in a cause, I think is also important, because I think in activism, it ranges on a continuum of levels of who you're talking to and who you're talking about and who you're wanting to speak for. And if it's all about that person being more well-known and more infamous and more powerful, or if it's about someone taking the information from the tiniest voice or the tightest corner and learning from that person, I think then you find someone who's in activism for the right reasons rather than for their own personal gain and power.
Yeah.
Just take it back to what Angela was saying last night, the idea that those moments at which she stepped into leadership, but not in that way that you're talking about, were moments when the cause was more important to her than her own reticence to make herself known. And I think that's another element of activism. The other thing that she said, which came with the risk taking you were talking about, and I just loved it. If anyone wasn't there, dancing on the edge of the roof, beautiful.
Right.
Very good. Good reminders and good tie to Wilma's presentation.
Activism is tied to power, and there are just so many different kinds of power. And we all have power that we probably don't know about. There's power by position, and power by personality, and power by information, and power by resource, and power by some kind of church calling or money or whatever. And I think that activism can bring out very ambivalent feelings about power. But if activism is not only trying to bring about change, but bringing about change, it does have to do with power and figuring out how you feel about power and what power you have, and that comfort level that you were talking about of risk-taking.
Okay, I'm going to move us on to another question, and then hopefully at the end we can open it up for anything. But I also would like to talk about this question of anger. As I talk to activists, often I hear people talk about anger at, or maybe outrage at injustices that exist and continue to exist while we're working to try to change them. And I'm wondering if the people here have experienced anger about issues and how they deal with it.
When you're in the political arena, you feel anger quite often, and it is frustrating. And you have to, particularly if you're, and Genevieve, I guess you could back me up on this. If you're in a race, you have to learn how to deal with that anger. As the spouse of someone running, I am being very into the campaign and knowing that our cause was just. If anybody attacked our issue or my husband, you know, the anger was just there. But you had to say, wait a minute. We're doing our thing, they're doing their thing, which goes back to the good and the bad activists. Not that the political opponents are bad, but you just don't agree all the time. And so dealing with anger is really a very difficult thing when you're in the heat of a political battle, and you just have to make a concerted effort about how you're going to do and how you're going to deal with it. And it's not easy.
And what were some of the techniques you used, or what? Well,
personally, I guess it was because Scott had a good attitude about it. He says, "I'm too busy to let that. We can't let that interfere with what we're trying to do." And I think that's a good response for anybody who's dealing with a situation that is somewhat explosive and you do have some anger involved. Is you just got to stay focused on what you're trying to accomplish and not get distracted by the thing that's causing the anger. I think one thing that maybe our decision was that either this is a positive experience and we're going to make the most of it, and therefore let's stay focused on that and stay very positive in what we're doing, made a big difference, except sometimes in the heat of the battle, you have to really remind yourself of that a lot. I don't know what you found politically.
I have a hard time distinguishing between being hurt and being angry.
Well, that's a good point.
And when I really am angry, I sometimes say to myself, Genevieve, you're actually just hurt. And I have become much less angry with time, a little bit to my surprise, and I am now just fascinated by the issues. And instead of being sort of enraged, it is like watching a cobra or a snake. I'm just fascinated to try to figure out what's happening, as opposed to just being, you know.
I think you're right about perspective, because this recent campaign I've been involved in, people would say, aren't you really upset and angry about some of the things being said about your son? And I could say, hey, that's their problem, not mine. And I really, so some maturity has developed on that side.
That reminds me of taking people to the legislature who hadn't seen the process before, and their reaction would be, how can you stand it? How can you stand to listen? And it would kind of take me aback, and it made me realize I'd gotten used to hearing that, you know, that language, the differences of views, and just was able to accept it without becoming as angry.
You know, one of the things about anger for me is, I think that there are times when, had I not been driven so by just being so furious, that I would have done nothing. You know, so I think that, you know, I think that there are times that, and I'm not afraid of anger. That, anger is not a bad thing. It's emotion like everything else. What we do with that anger becomes the tool. And what I have learned for me is that there are times when someone has said something, and there's different, when I am hurt, I feel so much more wounded and vulnerable. And so you have to kind of work with that too, because sometimes those emotions kind of rub up against one another in those experiences. But I've also found that I have seen and heard and experienced and witnessed things so egregious to me that has caused such a rage in me that if it had not brought that level of anger, I probably would have found at different times in my life a reason not to do anything, or to justify it, or to minimize it, or to, kind of rationalize out the whole process. But a certain level of anger has caused me to step up and speak out, step up and ask for help, or take something to a different level when I would not have otherwise. So sometimes I think that anger can be a catalyst and a tool to drive and move things in a more helpful, positive, or in any direction, but not to stay there just seething.
I really appreciate those remarks, because I think, like you, think that anger can be fuel for activism in a very positive way, in the righteous indignation sense, or at least that's how we experience it. But I also think that anger can turn on one and begin to consume your energy and your effectiveness, and even your personality. And maybe that's the distinction that has to be made. When anger is sending you out of yourself to address what you believe and care about, in terms of needing to be addressed, then it's a very positive force and is to be welcomed and lived with. But that when it is causing you to become alienated and isolated in your community and cutting you off from other human beings, getting to the point where you can no longer respect other people because of your own anger, that's probably a warning signal that it has begun to eat you instead of to fuel your work, and that it's unfortunate. And I can certainly confess to having experienced anger in both ways.
Sure.
And like Genevieve, I don't get as mad as often. And some of that is, you just get old and tired. So if for those of you who are young in here, there's something to look forward to.
I have to say that this is probably the thing that I feel that I cannot deal with, and it's not even anger. What happens to me on a personal level is that it goes from anger very quickly into sadness, and it can become so consuming, like you said. It can be very despairing, and luckily I have a lot of friends. I have a very good family that can kind of just look at me and say, you're gonna eat yourself alive with this if you don't, let go of it a little bit. But I don't. It's probably one thing that I feel I have the most lack of maturity on, is how to deal with the emotions that come and well up within you when you just feel like you're working so hard and other people are working so hard. And it's not even the fact that people won't even swing over to your side. The way you look at it is, I call it, my husband calls it, pulling my Pollyanna glasses on. And it's like, take off the Pollyanna glasses for a minute, because you've got to get a more objective viewpoint of what you're dealing with. But it does become very all-consuming, and sometimes it's a hard emotion to deal with, because for me, I kind of jump back into being a child again and say, why can't you just play fair? You're not playing fair. And that's when I'm at the most basic at my emotions. And of course, I would not be public about that, but when you go home and you've been working so hard on something and people just don't get it, it can become very consuming. You have to kind of, it's hard to shake off. It really is.
I have a mug that says, I don't get mad, I get even.
Yeah.
And I think most activists, if they can use that madness or anger to going on and achieving what they want to do, that's probably the best way to look at it.
there was a year in the Benyon Center in which a number of students kind of simultaneously reached the point, after just doing kind of ordinary service with people who were homeless, where they really got it, that this is a societal problem, that this is huge, that it's painful. And they were very young, and they were very, very angry. And they were several of them were really worried about how they were going to live with that. And they came across a book by Miles Horton, the founder of the Highlander School in Tennessee, civil rights, union workers, and Miles Horton had a story or a metaphor that I think really summarizes what we've been saying about how anger can be useful, but if it consumes you, it can be destructive. He likened the anger that activists feel to the days when slaves could have Christmas however long they could bank the Yule log. So as long as the log continued to burn, they could have Christmas. And he said that's what activists have to do. They have to feel the anger, they have to know it's there, they have to nurture it, but they have to keep it low enough that it doesn't burn them up. And so then our student president started handing out little sticks to everybody. This is your log. And somehow I come back to that frequently in my mind when I begin to feel really angry. Any comments from the audience about anger that you?
My issue right now is mental illness, and I'm angry a lot of the time, but the way I deal with some of it is through my own experience and my opinion of the issues and what the problem is. It's changed in the last 5 years because of my own experience with myself and with my family, and that is a type of education. So I pull myself back and I think, and it's a pity for the other person's lack of education or lack of enlightenment on the issue. And that's the way looking back, yes, I guess I do know why she wore. My mother had an outfit she wore to a Halloween party. She dressed as a bun, and she had a sign on the back that said, 6 months ago I couldn't spell degenerate, and now I are one. And at this point in my life, I think I know what she meant. That you live and you learn about other people's problems, sometimes through your own, but pity for their lack of education and enlightenment is a good way to kind of look at them as some strange sort of uneducated cobra. There's a t-shirt topic that says never underestimate the power of kind of like ignorant people in large numbers.
But also, don't underestimate the power of one, powerful educated person. Yeah, there's Carla.
Other comments from the audience or questions?
I just wanted, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
This is not so much a comment about anger, though I think maybe it links to anger, but it's a comment about the relationship between thinking and doing. And I guess I'm thinking about that being a professor here at the university. Many of us actually, for our jobs and what we consider our activism to be, is in part thinking. And I'm thinking how much brain power and how much sort of activist power is in this one room. And I find it discouraging and almost sort of anger producing that over the 13 years that I've been here, I haven't really ever seen us get together as a kind of think tank. When I think the different kinds of activism represented here, and again, many of you are working in your field of activism, and I know you do activism outside of that as well. But what would it mean to have some sort of vision for Utah women, or maybe Utah women and men, to have some sort of group of people that really work across their fields and come together as a kind of think tank, to give ourselves the time and the opportunity and sometimes the slow speed that we need to be able to think through what our next move should be as a group of fairly powerful people that have some influence in Salt Lake City. And I don't think I've ever really seen us coalesce in that way. We come together for panels like this that are fascinating. You feel like your own anger gets worked up in all kinds of productive ways, and your own excitement to really put yourself to the wheel. But the problem is that so many of us are so busy in our jobs and doing our own specific kind of activism that we don't really get to think across those boundaries. And I'm wondering if anybody sees a way to make a kind of coalition like that, where people come, even if it's just once a year, to designate a certain kind of topic that we were going to think about and help each other think about in order to make our doing even more splendid than it's been.
Did you want to comment on that?
I think about Genevieve doing the 100 Years Younger Women Project. That was that happening.
Yeah.
And so I think that it does happen. It may not happen on the scale that you dream of it happening, and I think it's a great vision, and I think you're a person that could.
You have just seen a wonderful activist exhibition. Did you want to add something?
Oh, I was just thinking about the comments too about taking off the Pollyanna lens, putting on the get real lens, and acknowledging your limitations. I came across a person that I was working with on adult learning and professional education and judicial education. If you want to talk about a hard to change discipline, you could look at mine. And she stood up in front of the classroom. She said, "I don't ever want you to share this with anybody you're actually trying to get to change, but I want you to remember it." And it's very much like your comment about not arguing with fools. I don't know if she made it up. I don't know where she stole it from, but it's you can't teach pigs to sing. It wastes your time and it annoys the pig. And every once in a while, you just have to decide that this is an institution or a person who will not ever learn your song or the song you would like to be sung, and move on. And it takes, I guess, a lot of hard knocks for each of us to figure out when we're in that setting. But it's very important to acknowledge it and to move on, because otherwise you can stew in your own juices in a very destructive way.
Was there somebody back here that had? Okay, right here.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to both of those comments. Certainly, the stewing in the juices pretty effective when we think of this as something that we, don't want to do. But I'd like to second the idea that certainly during Women's Week or something, the yearly forum should keep going, because I've been teaching in public schools and just retired from that, and the definite backlash can be seen there. I mean, young women just can't believe there's a problem that I've been dealing with in high school. Mostly because they've got their athletics, and they do know how new that is to have this wonderful opportunity, although it's not even spread. But they don't get it on the glass ceiling. They don't get it on some of the other problems that still exist. And certainly, I think most of us feminists realize we had better go undercover for quite a few years. But it's been too many years. I think it's time to come out in a new kind of voice. I mean, obviously, you don't have to do it the way it was done before. But you women have kept right on doing, and most people do, try to do what they can in their own little bailiwick. But to come together to celebrate. Now, there's been the kind of celebration, I forget the name, which I guess is biblical, of the yearly, is it Esther Land? I think it's named after her.
The Susa Young Gates?
The Susa Young Gates, yes. I mean, there is that, and I've gone sometimes, but I don't see these young women. I mean, we've got to somehow help you see that this is not a small thing, and that the fight is not won. It's definitely not over. And so we've made fantastic strides, but we could use that.
I'd like to follow up on that, and I think that this is one incident where it's very contingent that we do this on an individual level. It really is hard to persuade a whole new generation of young women that things were different 20, 30, 40 years ago and beyond. But I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I think it's part of what I see as a responsibility to raising her is making her very aware of the privilege that she has, whether it's economic privilege, whether it's educational privilege, and just make her aware that things were not always this way. And we've talked about labor laws. I mean, it's just kind of interesting whenever we watch Channel 7 together, and I know that not everybody has that kind of opportunity to do that, but whenever I can, I just know that that's something that is just important, as providing her food, providing her shelter, is a sense of social responsibility and of her station in life and what she can do. and that things were not always this way, and that they can go back to the way they were 50 or 60 years ago if she is complacent, if she and her peers are complacent. And so I know sometimes she kind of looks at me like, oh brother, but then I hear her talking to her friends about something that we talked about or something that we watched on TV the night before. And it's very heartening because then I can see that it's kind of, that it is sinking in and she's taking it to heart. So whether you have a daughter or whether you have a friend, I know a lot of times I depend on other female friends to talk to my daughter about things, and sometimes if it's not mom saying it, then it has much more credence than if this other woman friend says it.
That eye rolling's going to get worse.
Oh yes, I know that. And so that's why I'm very dependent on. I'm very attuned to the way things were in the past, where women stuck together in the Latino culture. We have comadres. They're women that are friends. They're not really relatives, but they're like this, and they help you raise your children. And so, girls often will turn to their mother's friends for inspiration or for information. And so, I always try to surround my children with other women that can also share this kind of spreading of the message. And so I guess what I'm saying is, even if you don't have your own daughters, even if nieces, friends, other girls definitely need to hear this. And it's kind of that thing of hearing the message 6 times before it sinks in. And they need to hear it a lot, and don't feel like you're saying it too much.
I came today because 20 years ago I got angry and I organized a couple of things, and they've been going for 20 years, like the purchasing council that looks for women and minorities to supply the university and other large businesses. And last year I felt that anger that I felt 20 years ago about something that I had never thought I would get involved with, and that's the county jail system. It's broken, it doesn't work, and it's horrible. So I came today along the same lines that you're talking about to look at the power that's sitting there at that table. And believe you me, you're all going to hear from me. And I took that anger for a few minutes, and then I said, okay, let's get not angry, but outraged. And now let's be very cold and calculating about this, because those guys are play the game. Take the victories where you can, but keep going on the main project, even though they tell you over and over again to drop dead and go away. I'm not going to go away, and I'm not going to drop dead. And I may be asking some of you for help, but that anger helped me to decide that I wanted to do something.
There's another good activist technique. Now, everyone in this room knows that if they're interested in the county jail system, there's somebody to work with. Okay.
I'd just like to stand and say I'm a product of having been sent to jail twice for what I believed needed to be changed in Utah. I am a graduate of the University of Utah back in 1986. And what happened was, a couple years after that, I was on the streets in the homeless shelters. And I decided, because I had a degree and I thought I was smart and I thought I had everything going on, that I was going to start some political action against the government that did not want to listen to a homeless woman. And that was me, and that was Norman Banger. And we tried, every single month we tried something, marching in front of the Capitol, we sent letters, we did every toilet paper to the Capitol and said, please listen, we think amongst ourselves feel we have the answer to the homeless problem. This governor would not yield. And so I went up and broke the law. And what it was, we spray painted the Capitol, put an HOMELESS across those 8 pillars, and again asked for 10 minutes. And they carted me to jail because I came forward in front of the media, which I hate, and because they're always down in the soup kitchen watching us eat. The thing that irks me more is for somebody to stay a camera and saying, this is what the homeless people are eating. And it irked me. You can see I'm still angry over this. Anyway, I got sent to jail. And so, come on, you people all know that you hate homelessness in this state, in this country. So they kept me in there for 2 weeks. I got out, and about 6 or 7 months later, I went up again and spray painted inside on the hotel. We want 10 minutes. Well, what happened was this huge man came out and grabbed me and carted me off to jail again. And then we went in front of the judge, and I said, Judge, the homeless people have the answer to the homeless problem. Of course, this governor will not listen. He says, well, we're not the same. We've got different legislative bodies going. I said, I knew all that. So finally, I just said, okay, I'm a homeless woman, and I'm a woman. So that must be the reason. There must be a reason why a governor will not listen to women. And I surmised that on my own. So I came back to the university, and now I'm in women's studies, trying to learn, because you don't graduate from this university and do nothing.
I'm going to throw one other question open before we run out of time, just to get it out there and maybe give us all a chance to think about it and you to think about it after you leave. And that is, I'm wondering if people feel like they've made personal sacrifices to be an activist, if you've benefited both, what you think about that.
I've benefited tremendously. I didn't really know I couldn't run for the legislature and win, so I did it. And I was lucky because had I not been elected, I probably wouldn't have gotten my first job in Utah, because I was the first woman with that engineering firm and was willing to work for almost nothing. And they thought it was an in to have someone who was in the legislature. I know many people who have gotten hurt by their activism. I think I'd like to echo what Norma said, sort of, which is, I think your family really can get hurt. And I think that's something you should think about as you do your own activism. Sometimes you not only are taking risks for yourself, but you're taking risks for others. I think it's much harder for the family to hear the negative things. I think it's much harder when they want to play and you want to activate. There are consequences, and it is a package deal, and I think it is important to not be blind to those, particularly those who are close to you, because they may feel they just may be marching to a different drummer.
Well, I believe that if you're in it long enough, there's both. I mean, you know, you're gonna make decisions at times that if you have the hindsight, you would make differently. I've had to make decisions and step back from things because I've had to look at the impact that it would have on my children, and I've had to sometimes step out and make decisions and say to my children, you know, this is something that was so important to me that I feel like I had to do it. I recall a situation where I had done something that was really ignorant and thoughtless on my part, and I had to go and make amends for that. And I remember in telling this woman what I had done, the way she looked at me and the hurt that I saw, and the rage that was in her at that moment, and realizing that part of activism is that we don't, I mean, we get out there, but the work is not done. We're always working, we're always learning, we're always growing, there's always work to be done. And in that process, I found myself walking away from a situation feeling very discouraged and very, very pained. And I think that that's part of it, because from that there's those lessons. So I don't know how you can really get involved in a community on a very deep level and not have some opportunity where you find yourself making sacrifices or realizing through those sacrifices the impact it has on your family, the people that you love. I haven't found a way to avoid that. I have found a way to understand that, and also I found a way to kind of try and balance that. And sometimes the scale tips and I find myself falling on a very hard rock. And sometimes, you know, I'm buoyant. So I think it's all a process.
What makes you buoyant?
You know, I think the fact that I have a really broad and diverse support system that really has, you know, recognizes for myself when I haven't recognized it, that I have, you know, burn the candle at both ends, and I'm right here and it's about to fizzle out, and they help revive me. I think when I hear my children echo some of the things that I've echoed in a way that makes a difference in their not little, but in their different network of friends, when I hear or see my children come back and help me to remember that, you know, the lessons that I've done when I think, oh, this is just too much, I need to be home more, and then I hear them come back and they teach me what I've been teaching them. Or when they come back and they embrace me the way that through my network of friends have embraced them when I couldn't. So I think that's, for me, been a great part of the buoyancy. Parents who gave me so much to start with. Parents that really gave me a core of dignity and integrity and self-worth.
I think at sometimes I feel like I've made some personal sacrifices, more just on an individual level. I'm envious of women that can go exercise and do things, and I feel like my every waking moment is dealing with either my activism, my work, my children, something else. But you know, when I start to feel sorry for myself, I think about the privilege that I have, the fact that I do have the support system with my husband and my children and a broader band of friends and family. And I think about the women that are activists at the groundswell level, who may not have those privileges but still have the passion and the fire within, and they still do so much. They may be single heads of households, they may be, dealing with issues economically that I don't have to deal with, but yet they still have that fire within and they still do so much. And so I think we all make personal sacrifices, and I value that which other people give. And I think Christine mentioned it earlier about appreciating what people can give, whatever level they can give. And then sometimes when you're in the heat of the battle, you get frustrated because people can't give more. But then you really have to, again, reach into that humility and say, come on, shake out of it, think about what this person is contributing and where they come from. And everybody makes a contribution. It's that one person at a time that can make such a difference coalesced.
We are at the time that we are supposed to adjourn. I just want to mention that we have heard activism described as everything from reaching out a hand to someone who needs that hand, to someone who's gone to jail for something that she believed in, and lots of expressions in between. I hope that the next time you have an opportunity to do an activist act, you'll remember this room full of people who are, whether they raise their hand, all in some way activists and can feel that power and take it with you. Thank you so much.
I want to tell you about the next event in Women's Week, and you can see that we're building a wonderful sense of momentum. Lance Duffin is the manager of the Open Unions Art Gallery, and he had a vision of somehow creating an artwork that would vivify brilliant women activists. And he has put together a fabulous exhibit of photographs of Utah women activists. It's in the Union Building. We're going to have a lovely reception this afternoon at 4 o'clock. We would very much like to have you there. Then tomorrow we're going to have Angela Davis at noon in the Open Union Ballroom. What a wonderful, exciting pair of Wilma Mankiller and Angela Davis. Before we go, I want to thank the university's First Lady, Chris Matchin, for coming here today. It's wonderful to have you in the library. So much appreciated. See you soon, okay? Come again.